In 1953, there was only one way to beat a $10,000 Chrysler Hemi. You had to go to the junkyard, find a piece of a World War II bomber, and bolt it to a Ford engine everyone said was trash. This is the story of Stuart Hilborn and the $75 part that destroyed Detroit. Picture this: Paradise Mesa dragstrip, Southern California, summer of 1953. The air smells like race fuel and burnt rubber. A crowd of 2,000 spectators lines the quarter-mile strip, watching Chrysler Hemis demolish everything foolish enough to challenge them. These engines are royalty. 331 cubic inches of overhead valve dominance, making 180 horsepower straight from the factory. They cost $800, which in 1953 money is roughly what a factory worker makes in 4 months. The guys who own them know it. They sit in their pristine roadsters, leather jackets gleaming, girlfriends on their arms, completely confident that nothing on this strip can touch them. Then a beat-up 1932 Ford rolls to the staging area. Primer gray paint, mismatched tires, no chrome. The engine note sounds wrong, like something from 5 years ago, 10 years ago. People in the crowd start whispering, "That's a Flathead." Ford's ancient V8 design from 1932. The same engine Ford abandoned in 1948 when they realized overhead valve engines were the future. Running a Flathead in 1953 is like bringing a musket to a gunfight. It's not just outdated, it's embarrassing. The Hemi guys notice. They start laughing. Not cruel laughter, more like pity. Some kid spent money building that antique when he should have saved up for a real engine. The starter climbs out to check his tires. He's 17 years old, skinny, wearing work pants and a white t-shirt with grease stains. No leather jacket, no girlfriend. Just a kid with a car that has no business being here. The starter walks between the two cars, raising the flag. The Hemi driver revs his engine, that distinctive Chrysler sound, mechanical thunder that vibrates in your chest. The crowd knows what's coming. They've seen this movie before. Expensive engine annihilates cheap engine. Rich guy beats poor guy. The natural order of things. The flag drops. What happens next makes no sense. The Flathead explodes off the line like it's been shot from a cannon. No hesitation, no bog, just instant violent acceleration. The Hemi, for a fraction of a second, stumbles. By the time the Hemi driver gets his engine sorted, the kid has a car length. 60 feet into the quarter mile, he has 2 car lengths. The Hemi's superior horsepower starts clawing back ground in the second half of the run, but it's too late. The math is already done. The Flathead crosses the finish line at 115 miles per hour. Time, 12.8 seconds. The Hemi crosses 3 car lengths behind, 112 miles per hour, 13.2 seconds. The crowd goes silent, then erupts. What just happened? How did a Flathead, an engine everyone considered obsolete, just destroy a Hemi? The Hemi driver is out of his car, hood up, checking his engine like something must have broken. Nothing broke. He just got beaten by technology he didn't understand. The kid in the Flathead? He's not celebrating. He's writing numbers in a small notebook, recording his run data like a scientist. His name is Stuart Hilborn, and he just proved something that will change American motorsports forever. You don't win races by spending the most money. You win by solving the right problem. And Stuart had solved the problem that Detroit's best engineers, with millions in research budgets, couldn't crack. While everyone else was obsessing over displacement, compression ratios, and camshaft profiles, Stuart had focused on something boring and invisible: fuel delivery. That weird intake manifold on his Flathead, the one with tubes sticking out instead of carburetors, wasn't just different, it was revolutionary. Mechanical fuel injection built from World War II bomber parts that cost him $75 at a surplus yard. That single innovation, that one piece of military technology nobody else thought to use, had just made a 21-year-old engine competitive with the newest, most expensive engines in America. This is the story of how a teenager working in his parents' garage rewrote the rules of hot rodding, not by playing the game everyone else was playing, but by changing what game was being played. It's the story of how bomber technology, designed to level cities, got repurposed to make cars go faster. How junkyard surplus became racing gold. How understanding physics mattered more than understanding hierarchies. The year 1953 sits at a strange intersection in American automotive culture. World War II has been over for 8 years. The Korean War just ended. Eisenhower's in the White House. The economy is booming. Young men have money in their pockets and a burning need for speed. Southern California has become ground zero for hot rodding. Every weekend, thousands gather at dry lake beds, abandoned airstrips and drag strips to race. This isn't organized motorsports with rules and safety equipment. This is raw, dangerous, and completely addictive.
The hierarchy at these races is brutal and simple. At the top sit the Hemi guys. The Chrysler 331 Firepower V8, introduced in 1951, dominates everything. Hemispherical combustion chambers, overhead valves, modern design. These engines are expensive, but they deliver. Stock makes 180 horsepower. Built properly, they'll push 250. Below them are the Oldsmobile Rocket 88 owners. Another overhead valve design, cheaper than the Hemi, but still respectable. Then come the Cadillac crowd with their big, torquey engines. At the absolute bottom, despised and pitied, are the Ford Flathead owners. The Flathead V8 revolutionized American cars when Henry Ford introduced it in 1932. For the first time, average people could afford a V8. It was simple, reliable, and made decent power for its era. But by 1953, it's ancient technology. The problem is fundamental. Flathead engines have their valves in the block, next to the cylinders, rather than in the head above the cylinders. This creates a complicated path for air and fuel to flow. It limits compression ratios. It makes the engine run hot. Overhead valve engines like the Hemi breathe better, rev higher, make more power. Physics doesn't care about nostalgia. A built Hemi will destroy a built Flathead. Everyone knows this. Except the Flathead has one advantage nobody talks about. Its simplicity. No complex valve train, no push rods, everything is accessible. For a kid with more brains than budget, the Flathead is the perfect canvas. Stuart Hilborn grew up in Linwood, California, in a household where mechanical problems were just puzzles waiting to be solved. His father had worked on B-17 bombers during the war, coming home with stories about the incredible technology that kept those planes flying at 25,000 feet, where carburetors would freeze and fail. Young Stuart absorbed everything. By 15, he was rebuilding engines in the family garage. By 16, he'd saved enough from his part-time job at a machine shop to buy that 1932 Ford Roadster. The engine was tired, burning oil, making maybe 60 horsepower, but it ran, and that was enough. Stuart became obsessed with the problem that haunted every hot rodder: carburetors. These devices, invented in the 1890s, work on a simple principle called the Venturi effect. Air flowing through a restriction creates vacuum. That vacuum sucks fuel through jets. Mix air and fuel, send it to the cylinders, make power. Simple in theory, terrible in practice. Here's what actually happens. When you stab the throttle, airflow increases suddenly.
The carburetor's Venturi needs time to create enough vacuum to pull more fuel. There's lag. The engine goes lean for a fraction of a second, stumbles, then floods rich as too much fuel arrives, then stabilizes. During hard acceleration, this cycle repeats constantly. The mixture oscillates between too lean and too rich, never quite perfect. Power suffers. More importantly, engines detonate. That pinging sound you hear under acceleration? That's uncontrolled combustion from lean mixture. Do it enough and you melt pistons. Racers tried everything to fix this. Multiple carburetors, bigger carburetors, different jet sizes, alcohol fuel instead of gasoline. Nothing solved the fundamental problem. Carburetors are passive devices. They react to what the engine does. They can't anticipate. They can't deliver exactly what's needed exactly when it's needed. Stuart knew the solution already existed because his father had told him about it. On B-17 bombers flying at 25,000 feet, where air temperature drops to minus 40 degrees, carburetors would ice up and fail. The fuel would freeze in the float bowls. Engines would quit and bombers would fall from the sky. The solution was mechanical fuel injection. Bendix Corporation had developed systems that used engine-driven pumps to force fuel directly into the cylinders. No venturi, no vacuum, no float bowls to freeze, just positive displacement pumps delivering precise amounts of fuel based on throttle position and engine speed. These systems were complex, expensive, and engineered specifically for 9-cylinder radial aircraft engines turning 2,500 RPM, but they worked flawlessly. After the war ended, the military had 12,631 B-17s they didn't need anymore. Thousands got scrapped for aluminum. The engines, massive Wright 1820 Cyclones, were broken down, but the fuel injection systems? Nobody wanted them. They sat in surplus yards, these precision-engineered marvels, basically worthless because nobody knew what to do with them. Stuart knew exactly what to do with them. The Douglas Aircraft Surplus Yard in Long Beach was 15 miles from Stuart's house. He'd ride his bicycle there on Saturdays, crawling through bins of bomber parts, studying everything. The yard workers thought he was crazy. What's a kid want with aircraft parts? He can't even drive yet. But they let him dig. In the summer of 1952, Stuart found what he'd been looking for: 3 complete Bendix fuel injection systems, still in their original packaging. The pumps, the nozzles, the control linkages, everything. The yard wanted $75 for all 3. Stuart had saved $82 from his job. He bought all 3 systems, loaded them into his father's truck, and brought them home like treasure. His father looked at the complicated mass of aluminum, steel fittings, and rubber lines spread across the garage floor and asked the obvious question: "How are you going to make aircraft parts work on a car engine?" Stuart's answer was simple: "I'll figure it out." What followed was 6 months of the most intense engineering education a teenager could get. The Bendix pump was a masterpiece of mechanical complexity. It used a wobble plate, essentially a disc mounted at an angle on a shaft. As the shaft rotated, the wobble plate's angle pushed 9 plungers in and out. Each plunger fed fuel to one cylinder of the radial engine. The fuel pressure was controlled by a boost venturi that measured airflow and adjusted pump output accordingly. Everything was timed precisely to match the radial engine's firing order. Stuart needed to make this work on an 8-cylinder V8 that fired in a completely different sequence and could spin to 5,000 RPM instead of 2,500. First problem: cylinder count. 9 plungers for 9 cylinders. Stuart needed 8. His solution was mechanically simple but required precision machining. He removed one plunger assembly from the pump, but now the wobble plate was unbalanced. It would create uneven fuel delivery pulses. Stuart spent 2 weeks with a milling machine reshaping the wobble plate's cam profile. He converted it from radial engine timing to V8 timing, essentially reprogramming a mechanical computer. The mathematics were brutal. The V8 fires every 90 degrees of crankshaft rotation. The wobble plate needed to deliver fuel pulses that matched. He made templates from cardboard, checking angles, rechecking, making adjustments. When he finally got the cam profile right and reassembled the pump, it weighed 6 pounds less and was balanced perfectly. Second problem: fuel pressure. Aircraft engines had cylinders the size of coffee cans. They needed massive amounts of fuel delivered at high pressure, minimum 25 psi. The Flathead cylinders were much smaller. Too much pressure would flood them. Stuart needed a way to regulate pressure based on engine speed and throttle position. He built a bypass system using hydraulic fittings from a truck parts store. Fuel from the pump split into 2 paths. One went to the engine, one went back to the fuel tank. An adjustable valve controlled how much went each direction. More valve opening meant less pressure to the engine. By carefully adjusting this valve and testing at different RPMs, Stuart could dial in exactly the right pressure for any engine speed. At idle, 8 psi. At full throttle, 35 psi. Perfect progression. Third problem, and this was the hardest: fuel atomization. The Bendix nozzles were designed to spray fuel into huge aircraft cylinders with lots of time for the fuel to vaporize and mix with air. The Flathead's tiny intake ports needed fine atomization immediately. Big fuel droplets would puddle in the manifold, causing uneven distribution between cylinders. Stuart needed mist, not drops. He experimented with different nozzle designs for 3 months, boring them out to different sizes, adding deflector plates, changing spray angles. Testing each iteration required installing the system, running the engine, pulling the spark plugs to read combustion patterns, measuring exhaust temperature at each cylinder, making notes, then modifying the nozzles and trying again. He went through 47 different nozzle configurations. What finally worked was positioning. Stuart discovered that if he placed the nozzles at exactly the right point in the intake runner, where vacuum was highest during the intake stroke, the vacuum itself would help atomize the fuel. The fuel spray hit this high-velocity airstream and shattered into tiny droplets. Perfect atomization without complicated nozzle designs. The first complete system installation took Stuart 80 hours. He fabricated a custom intake manifold from aluminum stock, drilling and tapping ports for 8 injection nozzles. He mounted the pump to the engine block, driven by a gear from the camshaft. He plumbed fuel lines, installed the pressure regulator, connected the throttle linkage to the pump's metering valve. When everything was together, the engine looked strange. Where carburetors should sit, there were just 8 tubes sticking up with nozzles on the ends. People who saw it thought Stuart had built some kind of bizarre science experiment. They weren't wrong. The first start was terrifying. Stuart's father insisted on being there in case something exploded. Stuart primed the system, set the throttle, hit the starter. The engine cranked, fired, died, cranked again, fired, caught, settled into an idle that sounded different, smoother, more mechanical. Stuart blipped the throttle. The engine responded instantly, no hesitation, no bog, just immediate linear response. His father smiled. That sounds right. The first dyno test happened at a local speed shop whose owner owed Stuart's father a favor. A stock flathead made about 85 horsepower. Stuart's engine, with mild modifications, high compression heads, and a performance cam, should make around 130 with dual carburetors. That was the baseline everyone expected. The dyno operator strapped down the roadster, connected the sensors, and started the pull. First run, 142 horsepower. The operator frowned. Let me recalibrate, something's off. Second run, 144 horsepower. Third run, 146 horsepower. The numbers were consistent. Stuart's injected flathead was making 15 more horsepower than an equivalent carbureted engine. But horsepower wasn't the real story. The torque curve was. A carbureted flathead makes power in a narrow RPM range. Below 2,500 RPM, it's lazy. Above 4,500 RPM, it falls flat. The useful power band is maybe 2,000 RPM wide. Stuart's injected engine made strong power from 1,800 RPM to 5,200 RPM. Flat, consistent torque across 3,400 RPM. The dyno chart looked like a plateau instead of a hill. This changes everything, the shop owner said. You can gear this thing completely different. Stuart understood immediately. With a wider power band, he could use a taller gear ratio, more top speed without sacrificing acceleration. The math worked out to a theoretical trap speed of 118 miles per hour if he could get traction. No flathead had ever gone that fast. The real advantage showed up in throttle response testing. The shop had a device that measured the time between throttle input and power delivery. They'd stab the throttle and measure how many milliseconds passed before the engine developed full power. Carbureted engines showed lag times between 180 and 240 milliseconds depending on RPM, nearly a quarter second of delay. Stuart's injection system showed 12 milliseconds, essentially instant. The shop owner, a veteran racer named Tommy, looked at Stuart like he'd built something from the future. "Kid, do you understand what this means for drag racing?" Stuart nodded. "Whoever leaves first wins." Exactly. Drag racing in 1953 was primitive. No electronic timing systems, no staging lights, no reaction time measurements. The starter stood between two cars and dropped a flag. When the flag dropped, both drivers stabbed the throttles. The car that got moving first usually won because the races were so short. A quarter mile takes 13 seconds. Being ahead by half a car length at the start means you're probably going to win. Carbureted engines bog when you hit the throttle from idle. The sudden rush of air overwhelms the carburetor's ability to deliver fuel. The engine stumbles for a fraction of a second before it catches and accelerates. That bog, that tiny hesitation, costs races. Stuart's injection had no bog. The pump was mechanically linked to the throttle. More throttle meant more fuel, period. No waiting for physics, no lag, just instant power. Tommy set up a test. He brought his own car, a 1929 Model A with a built flathead, running 3 Stromberg carburetors. His engine made 155 horsepower, more than Stuart's. They lined up side by side in the shop's parking lot. Tommy counted down. 3, 2, 1, go. Both drivers floored their throttles simultaneously. Tommy's engine hesitated for maybe 200 milliseconds, then roared to life. Stuart's engine just exploded forward. By the time Tommy's car was moving, Stuart had a car length. In a quarter-mile race, Tommy's extra horsepower would eventually close the gap, but he'd need a half-mile to catch up. "I'll give you $500 for that system right now," Tommy said. Stuart smiled. "Not for sale, but I'll build you one for $350. Deal." Word spread through Southern California's tight-knit racing community with the speed of wildfire. There's a kid in Linwood who built some kind of fuel injection system from airplane parts. His Flathead is beating Hemis. Most racers didn't believe it. Fuel injection was experimental technology. NASCAR's best teams had tried it and failed. How did some teenager figure it out? The skeptics showed up at Paradise Mesa the next Saturday to see for themselves. Stuart's Roadster looked even worse in daylight. The primer paint was thin in spots, showing bare metal underneath. The interior was just a seat and a steering wheel. No gauges except a tachometer Stuart had built from a bicycle speedometer and some creative gearing. But that intake manifold, those 8 tubes with nozzles, that was different. A Hemi owner named Richard pulled up next to Stuart's car.
Richard's Roadster was immaculate. Candy apple red paint, chrome everywhere, leather interior. His engine was a full-race Hemi that cost $1,200 to build and made 240 horsepower on the dyno. He looked at Stuart's car and laughed. "That thing runs?" Stuart didn't respond. He just fired the engine, that distinctive mechanical idle, smooth and precise. Richard's smile faded slightly. "What is that?" "Fuel injection," Stuart said, "from a B-17 bomber." Richard laughed again. "You put airplane parts on a Ford? Kid, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard." "We'll see," Stuart said. They staged. The crowd gathered, maybe 200 people. Everyone wanted to see if the rumors were true. The starter raised the flag. Richard revved his Hemi, showing off. The sound was impressive, brutal, intimidating. Stuart's Flathead just idled, waiting. The flag dropped. Stuart's car launched like nothing anyone had seen before. No wheel spin, no bog, just violent forward acceleration. Richard's Hemi stumbled for a fraction of a second, then caught and roared. But the damage was done. By 60 feet, Stuart had 2 car lengths. The Hemi's superior power started clawing back ground. At the 8th mile, the gap was 1 car length. The Hemi was reeling him in, but there wasn't enough track. Stuart crossed at 115.2 miles per hour in 12.76 seconds. Richard crossed at 113.8 miles per hour in 13.18 seconds. The crowd erupted. Richard sat in his car, confused. He'd been beaten by a Flathead. His $1,200 race motor, built by professionals, had lost to a kid's junkyard creation. He got out, walked over to Stuart's car, and looked at the intake manifold. "Show me," he said. Stuart explained the entire system, the bomber pump, the pressure regulation, the nozzle positioning. Richard listened, asking technical questions. He wasn't angry, he was fascinated. "How much to build me one?" $350, Stuart said, "plus about 6 weeks. I've got 4 cars ahead of you." "I'll pay $500 if you move me to the front of the line," Richard said. "Deal." That was the moment Stuart Hilborn became a businessman. He was 17 years old, still living with his parents, and he'd just made a sale that would pay for a year of college. Except Stuart wasn't going to college. By Monday morning, 7 more racers had contacted him wanting injection systems. By Friday, he had 14 orders. Each system took about 40 hours to build and tune. At $350 each, Stuart was looking at nearly $5,000 in revenue. His father did the math. "At this rate, you'll make more than I do. You could turn this into a real business." Stuart had been thinking the same thing. The Bomber surplus pumps were good, but they required extensive modification. Each one was slightly different, which meant each installation was custom work. If he wanted to scale this into a real business, he needed standardization. He needed to design his own pump from scratch, purpose-built for automotive applications. Stuart spent 3 months drafting designs.
Instead of a wobble plate, he used a cam-driven plunger system similar to diesel injection pumps. Instead of fixed timing, he made it adjustable so racers could tune for different fuels. Instead of one-size-fits-all nozzles, he created a range of sizes for different engine displacements. The prototype Hilborn pump was everything the Bendix wasn't. Lightweight at just 18 pounds, configurable for any engine from 4 to 12 cylinders, adjustable injection timing, simple enough that any competent mechanic could service it, and most importantly, it was designed to be manufactured efficiently. In early 1954, Stuart incorporated Hilborn fuel injection and rented a small shop in Linwood. His parents were terrified. He was throwing away his future, they said. College was the path to success, not building car parts in a garage. But Stuart had a vision they couldn't see. Drag racing was exploding. The NHRA had just formed to organize the sport. Speeds were climbing rapidly. The difference between winning and losing was measured in hundreds of seconds. Carburetors had reached their performance limit. Everyone was looking for an edge. Hilborn injection was that edge. By 1955, Hilborn injected cars dominated Southern California drag strips. By 1956, they'd spread nationwide. Then came Indianapolis. The Indianapolis 500 was American racing's crown jewel. Every significant innovation debuted there. In 1952, Bill Vukovich had experimented with fuel injection but couldn't make it reliable. When Stuart approached legendary car builder Frank Curtis with a proposal to inject an Offenhauser engine for the 1956 race, Curtis was skeptical but willing to test. The Offenhauser was a 270 cubic inch four-cylinder, making about 350 horsepower with carburetors. With Hilborn injection, it made 385 horsepower and delivered power smoothly from 3,000 to 7,000 RPM. Pat Flaherty won the 1956 Indianapolis 500 in a Hilborn-injected car at an average speed of 128 miles per hour, shattering the previous record. Within 2 years, every competitive Indy car ran Hilborn injection. The carburetor era at Indianapolis was over. Detroit noticed. GM was developing Rochester fuel injection. Chrysler had their Bendix electrojector. Both were complex, expensive, and unreliable. Hilborn's mechanical system just worked. No electronics to fail, no sensors to malfunction, just precision engineering. By 1960, Hilborn fuel injection employed 50 people and produced 100 systems monthly. Each was hand-assembled and dyno tested. Quality was fanatical because reputation was everything. Stuart Hilborn never finished high school, never got an engineering degree, but he held 23 patents and consulted for Ford, Chrysler, and GM. The teenager who bought bomber parts for $75 had revolutionized American motorsports. Today, 70 years later, Hilborn fuel injection still exists, still building systems for racers. Those distinctive velocity stacks remain the symbol of drag racing's golden age. Every modern fuel injection system, every electronically controlled injector, every millisecond precise fuel map owes something to that kid in Linwood who looked at a junkyard full of bomber parts and saw the future. The lesson isn't about fuel injection. It's about seeing solutions where others see obstacles. It's about applying knowledge from one field to solve problems in another. Stuart Hilborn didn't beat the Hemi guys because he had more money or better connections. He beat them because he asked a different question. While everyone else asked how to make carburetors work better, Stuart asked whether carburetors were the right answer at all. That $75 investment in surplus parts proved that innovation doesn't require massive resources. It proved that teenagers can change industries. It proved that sometimes the best solution is hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone with vision to recognize its potential. What unexpected solution have you discovered by looking at a problem differently? Share your story in the comments below.